So this story is called The Wisps, and it started when America was starting to do its western expansion, and they were starting to send a bunch of us out to new territories to develop communities and establish settlements for living in different areas of the western United States. So during this time, there was a lot of people moving to the west, and with that, most of the regions where we settled were regions that had a lot of resources. So typically, we settled in places that had a lot of wood, had mining opportunities, had lots of water, things like that. And so we would go to these different areas and we'd settle and we'd start building homes, and these became jump points for people to keep going farther and farther west. The thing was that these early settlements usually had a lot of men and women moving out there, but they also had children. And because the men were all working to do forestry or mining or anything like that, they were gone all day, and then the women would be left behind to do the gardening, to build houses, or to settle the houses, and to um, really get all the preparations and the gardening and livestock and whatnot established. So this left very little time to pay attention to children. So there were people like me that would go along that did not have um, family members that they needed to look after or had work that they needed to do, but worked really well with children. And so we, by default, became, we didn't call them teachers back then, but I was the caretaker of the children. So we got to this one settlement and we were starting to um, get everything in preparation. The houses were being built and the areas were being scouted and established. So I would spend my days with the children, and we would do stuff in the town. Typically, we'd help out with what little we could. I'd teach the students how to mend clothing and to gather eggs and to start with the gardening and things like that. But ultimately, there was a lot that we couldn't do because we got in the way. So I ended up doing scouting, and we ended up doing a lot of um, environmental education is what we would consider it now. So figuring out plants and knowing which plants we could eat and which couldn't, what naming the different plants. And at this time there wasn't scientific names or names that were established. So a lot of the names we gave uh, pertain to what we saw. So if the tree was yellowish, it was the yellow tree, or uh, giving it defining characteristics to give it names. Sometimes the kids would name it funny things just to be comical, but the names would stick because we'd also remember them. So as the weeks went on and the months went on, we learned the different areas very well because we were very limited. And at times the kids would say, how come we don't ever go into the woods? How come we don't go farther? And personally, when I was without the children, I would go and investigate these things. But the children would often make comments saying, hey, let's go out and stay out overnight, and let's go hiking deep into the woods, or let's do this. So the children becoming bored with only seeing the same thing over and over again and doing the same things, much like is going on right now, um, their curiosity was piqued, and therefore they wanted to see and do new things and more things. And so the children's begging me to go out into the woods and to do campouts and things like that grew more and more until finally I said, if you can get okayed with your parents, it's fine by me, let's do it. And so, of course, the children immediately ran to their mothers, and the mothers said, we'll discuss it with your fathers and things like that. So after a day or two, the children all came back and they said that their parents gave them the okay. So I went and talked around the town and reassured the parents that I would be with them and what we were going to be doing. And we began to prepare. So the children got their sleeping wraps, which were essentially wool blankets, and got potatoes and little things that we could carry along. Some were able to bring loaves of bread, um, anything that we could take, some jerkies and some fish and things like that. So we started collecting all the things that we need, candles, and we got all together and we set out into the woods. And so the plan was to do a 3-day trip. So 3 days, 2 nights. So these kids back in the day knew how to hike. I mean, this was their daily life, to walk around, to be physical, to do manual labor. So to do a lot of miles in one day was not that big of a deal. So the kids are like, let's keep going further. So we started going into the woods and finding our way, and these were thick woods, so it was difficult to get through some of the brush and the thorns and the different um, foliage that was growing. But we kept going and going, and we didn't have any way to measure how far we went. We could only go with how much time it was, landmarks, and the height of the sun. So we kept going and going and going, and the kids kept pressing and wanting to go farther and farther. And these weren't old kids. Some of them were what we would consider middle schoolers in today's age, and there was even a couple of kids that were younger than that. And then we had a few that were around my age that were younger teens, but still were able to really get the hikes in. And so we hiked, and we took our lunch breaks, but the kids wanted to go farther and they were very interested in all the new things that we were seeing. So we just kept going deeper and deeper until the sun started to set. And so the the sun sets very quickly in the woods, and you can tell that once the sun is starting to break the tree line where the tops of the trees are, it gets very dark in the woods. So we started to make camp. And that first night, we we didn't we stayed up saying telling stories, and we made dinner and a nice fire, and most of the kids were out very quickly. So the plan was to stay in that same spot, but the next morning the kids were so excited to see all these new areas that we kept pressing forward. And so we didn't go much farther. We probably hiked maybe